every day that we have a chance to walk away from the past, the things that held us, the things that we were taught that no longer serve us, the things that drag us down. Maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's a job, whatever it is, we get to walk away. If it's not serving us, it's not serving us any longer. And we walk away from the opinions of others. That's sometimes the hardest one to walk away from, because that can sometimes hold us. But more than that, we are walking away. I love that. We're walking away, but what are we walking? We're walking away from something, but what are we walking to? I think that's also an important piece, that we're walking toward something. We're not running away. We're not just walking away, but we're walking toward. And I think what Brené Brown talks about in her book, Braving the Wilderness, is that we're walking toward the consciousness of belonging to ourselves so deeply, that we can walk away from the past. She says in the book, it's later on in the book, but she says that true belonging is a spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. And that's very powerful, very powerful. I know that when I was, I really went through a time early in my life when I didn't think I belonged to my family. She talks about that in the book. And I really did think God must have made a mistake here. Surely I don't belong to this family. Or maybe the nurse has switched me in the nursery at birth. Certainly this was not my family. And she talks about that in the book. She shares her story about the pain that comes from feeling like you don't belong in your family or in other ways in your life, that you want to belong to something. She says in one of her earlier books, which it may be in this one as well, but I remember this, The Gifts of Imperfection. It's also a very powerful book. She says, of this I'm actually certain, after collecting thousands of stories, I'm willing to call this a fact. A deep sense of love and belonging is an irreducible need of all women, men, and children. We are biologically, cognitively, physically, and spiritually wired to love, to be loved, and to belong. So it's very powerful that if we are, it's in our DNA. We are wired to want to be loved and want to belong, and if we don't feel as though we belong, it's very painful. She shares with her story in the book about not belonging to her family and then not belonging to this group that she wanted to belong to in high school. So if you read the book, you're very familiar with her story about the Bear Cadets and not belonging to the Bear Cadets and how painful that was, not necessarily because of that, but because she didn't belong to her family in that regard. And I'm sure all of us, many, if not all of us in this room, probably could share a story about not belonging or feeling like we don't belong. And I certainly have my own stories around that, which I'm going to share with you a little bit today at the risk of maybe revealing a little bit too much about myself. But my story is the only one I can tell, because mine is the only one I know, right? And some of you, I'm sure, have stories that would make mine pale in comparison. I have no doubt about that. So I hope you can relate to some part of this story, my story. As I said, I never really thought I belonged. Even as a kid, it was like, really? Really? I belong to this redneck family? Really? And I don't mean it, that's a very judgmental thing to say, isn't it? I love my family. But I remember as a child, I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I do remember I really had no desire to own a gun, to hold a gun, to ever shoot a gun, even though in the family that I grew up in rural Georgia, that was part of being a young boy. You had to learn to shoot a gun. I had no desire. But I did do the obligatory hunting trip with my dad once. And I did shoot a squirrel or a chipmunk or something, and I immediately started crying. I immediately started bawling and told my dad, I can't do this. I cannot do this. And I don't know what he said. I don't remember what he said, but I remember feeling that disappointment in my dad, that I was not the son that he really wanted me to be. And I kept trying. I didn't want to go fishing either. I mean, again, at the risk of revealing too much about myself, putting that nasty worm on a hook was just gross. And then to be waiting all that time, just doing absolutely nothing. And then once you caught a fish, you had to take the dang squirmy, slimy thing off the hook. It just wasn't my thing. I was not wired that way. And then, if that wasn't enough, my dad and mother wanted me to play Little League baseball. Really? But I did. One season. Although it was a truncated season because I was not good at it. I was a little chubby at the time, and so knowing that I was not good at it, they decided to make me the catcher. So I got to, wear all the catcher garb and kind of stand behind the plate. And I just remember, this may be way too much information, but it was so embarrassing for the coach and my dad to show me how to wear a cup. I was like, really? So I was not very good at it. So you can imagine my relief when a couple of weeks into the baseball season, I had an accident on my mini bike. And I burned my foot really badly, and I cut it, and I had to have stitches. I didn't have to play baseball anymore. What a relief. So I didn't have to do that anymore, and it was never brought up to me again. I can't imagine why. But fast forward a little bit, so it's like, I got all that stuff going on with my family, and that, we're not really quite sure about David. And I remember overhearing a friend of my mom's once. They were in their living room, and I was going to my bedroom or something, and I remember her talking to my mom and saying, do you worry about David? Do you worry about him being a sissy? So that was like, really? Very painful. Well, fast forward a little bit. I think I was probably about 13. I'd gone through a really awkward stage of elementary school hiding as much as I possibly could. I was overweight. I would wear clothes that really would not attract any attention. I wore my hair really long and shaggy and trying to hide behind all of that. And so I went through this awkward stage. And then about 13 or so, my family moved around churches quite a bit when I was a kid. I know this is hard to believe, but sometimes there is dissension in politics that goes on in churches. And I know none of you are aware of any of that, but my family moved around quite a bit of churches. I mean, we went to Presbyterian, we went to Methodist, we went to Baptist, and finally, when I was about 13, we started going to Abilene Baptist Church in Martinez, Georgia. Now, just the name, we called it Martinez, Georgia. That tells you something. Rather than Martinez, it was Martinez. So that tells you a little something about the culture of the South. But we went to this church, and my sister was a little older, like 14 months older than I, and she was a part of this youth group. So I got involved in the youth group there at Abilene Baptist Church when about 13. And we had Sunday morning, Sunday school, church, we had Sunday evening, we had Wednesday night, we had all sorts of things going on at the church. And I was involved. I would go to Bible study with the youth group on Sunday nights. I was the one who actually read the lesson and had the questions. I was the only one, seems like, in my group. So again, it was like, who are you and why are you asking all these stupid questions? But I did feel like I belonged there. It's like I found a group to which I can belong and who accept me. And I had a girlfriend at the, I'm moving ahead pretty quickly, but I met a girlfriend there in that youth group, and she was part of the A crowd in high school. So I was like in at that point, just because of her in some ways. And so, I got involved, and as I was aging into the more adult group, I got involved in the choir. I was singing with choir. I was helping with the youth choir. All sorts of things I was doing in that church. And when I got into college, when I was maybe around when I was about to turn 18, 19, somewhere in there, I was discovering my own sexuality. I'd already been discovering it, but anyway, in college, it was much easier. And one night, on Wednesday night, in a choir practice, this friend of mine, who was a very dear friend of mine, at the time, I was like part of his family. I would babysit his children. He was a little older, obviously, but maybe 5 or 6 years older. I would babysit his kids. I was part of his family. He called me out of choir practice into the hallway, and he said, I know what you've been doing. I know what you've been up to. And you are a hypocrite for being here in this choir practice. You do not belong here. And I remember it like it was yesterday. It was one of the most painful experiences I have ever had. I walked out of that church, never looked back, never had any more association with that church or any Baptist church for that matter, and didn't have anything to do with that man again for about 30 years. But it was devastating, really, to know or to be told that you do not belong. And I knew at the depth of my being that really wasn't necessarily the truth. But I'll tell you, I had nothing to do with church after that for many, many years. Because I did believe that I certainly did not belong in a church, certainly did not belong in a group of people who were involved in a church. And so, as I said, I know that, and what Brene Brown says about that idea of not belonging, she says, even in the context of suffering, poverty, violence, human rights violations, not belonging is still one of the most dangerous hurts. That's because it has the power to break our heart, our spirit, and our sense of self-worth. They broke all three for me. And when those things break, there are only three outcomes, something I've borne witness to in my life and in my work. And those three outcomes are, you live in constant pain and seek relief by numbing it or inflicting it on others. You deny your pain, and your denial ensures that you pass it on to those around you and down to your children. Or you find the courage to own the pain and develop a level of empathy and compassion for yourself and others that allows you to spot hurt in a world in a unique way. And I will tell you that I have done all of that. That it's so painful, that aspect of my life was so painful that I did many things to numb the pain, including when I got into college, going out with friends, got involved in a group, again, wanting to belong, getting involved in a group who was a party group who were drinking and smoking pot and smoking cigarettes and doing other things. And I wanted to belong so badly that I got involved in that group, even though I knew, the depth of my being, I knew that was not me. But I wanted to belong, and we do these things in order to fit in, right? I got involved in relationships and acting out in other ways that were about numbing pain. I know I didn't intentionally hurt other people, but I know I hurt other people. I know I hurt other people because I was in pain and didn't know how to deal with that pain. And then eventually, hopefully, I have come into some way of understanding that, and I'll say a little bit more about that. Just a more hopeful part of my story. It took me a while, a long time really, of doing many things, acting out, all sorts of things, until I discovered and got involved in 12 Steps. And as I've said to you before, many of you probably heard this before, that in my search for God, I started going to church, and I went to Unity Church of Dallas at the time. And I don't know why it struck me so deeply at the core of my being that day when I walked in there, but I heard the minister say, "You are as God created you." Man, I can't think of it without feeling the emotion of it, you know? And I heard that, and it resonated with me. And even more than that, as she was talking about that, then she led into a meditation. And the meditation was, a lead into the meditation was this little chant. I am as God created me. I am as God created me. And it was just like calling me to an understanding that I had never had before. And I think she doesn't use specifically the language in the book, but what it is for me is calling us back. That our spirit is always, our soul is always calling us home to that place of belonging to ourselves, belonging to a place where we know who we truly are, and being willing to express who we truly are, not to become who someone else wants us to be so that we fit in or that we think we belong, the pseudo-belonging, but to truly belong so deeply to who we are as a divine expression of God that we have the courage and that we practice the authenticity to be who we are, even in a world that doesn't always accept that. And so that was the beginning of my journey toward that belonging. And what I want to share with you is that it is a journey. It is a journey, it is not a destination. At least that's the way I perceive it. That every day I have the opportunity to walk away from that past. Every day I have an opportunity to allow that to come up and to deny that and to affirm my truth and to live that truth. Every day. It's a journey. But it's a journey well worth taking, because every opportunity I have to embrace who I truly am, to be who I truly am, is empowering. And so, as she said, we come to a place where we can find the empathy for our compassion for ourselves, past all of the pain. I'm going to say not past all of the pain, but being with the pain. We find empathy. What am I truly longing for? I'm longing to be myself, to be authentically me, and to belong. Belong everywhere in the universe, which is really no place, nowhere. But I know I belong. I love what Byron Katie says. I step into a room and I know you love me, I just don't expect you to realize it. And there's great freedom in that. Great freedom in knowing you love me, but not expecting you to realize it necessarily. And in that way, I belong. I belong to me. I know who I am. And so again, it's a practice of empathy, self-empathy. What am I feeling? Get in touch with the pain. Feel the pain. Allow the pain. Find somebody who can help you connect with the pain. Really give you empathy and compassion, because that is healing. It is healing. And then to give yourself that empathy and compassion as well, because I believe it requires that for us to have the courage to step out, to speak our truth, to be who we truly are. And not only that, but to support others in being who they truly are, in whatever way we possibly can. I was deeply saddened recently, it hasn't been that long ago, when I heard about that 9-year-old boy who died by suicide because he had come out as gay. And his friend told him, well, you might as well just go kill yourself. And he did. That's sad. And as Jay was showing me a friend's Facebook post the other day, she said, I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I can no longer accept. And so I think we, as a culture, as a society, can no longer accept that. It's just not acceptable for a child, any child, to believe they do not belong. And so I think it's our opportunity every moment to encourage and to support and to do whatever we can do to create that atmosphere of love and acceptance and belonging for all of us. And I think we do that. And I think that is something we can really strive for, individually and collectively. And so, again, belonging. I belong everywhere and nowhere. And we'll talk more next week about some practices, some tangible things that we can do to truly engage in that belonging. And if you're not a part of a study group, I would encourage you to sign up for one. Get involved in the book, because it's really not only just learning what she has to say, but learning about yourself as well. So, thank you for this morning.